Okay, first take, let's try this. Okay, so here I have a timer, and I currently have it set up so that when you click the button, it starts from 15 seconds, and then after 15 seconds, we should see it explode. I should probably have made it a bit shorter. 5, 4, 3, 2, and then 1. We see an explosion. Awesome. So let me show you how I did this. Here in the project, we can see we've got this cube that makes up the timer. You'd want to replace this with whatever model you want. However, this is also the collider that has the Udon behavior on it. Then we have this canvas, which is just set to be whatever. And then on it, we have a Text Mesh Pro object that is showing the text. To do this, we just simply go to the canvas, and I went UI, Text Mesh Pro. And you'll notice that this is a Text Mesh Pro text UI object, which is very important. You'll need to remember that. Last but not least, I did change some of the settings, so I kept it on the left, I put it in the middle, and then I kind of moved it across a bit, and then put in the default, which is hours, minutes, seconds, and then milliseconds. And so that's essentially what I got the text to. And then I just made it look really nice and whatnot. Cool. And then last but not least, we have a particle system, which you can look at these values yourself if you are interested. The color of a lifetime just makes it fade. And I've got this burst on it. Also, make sure you have play on awake disabled. And we can see that when it plays, it does a nice little particle effect. And then last but not least, we have an audio source, which once again does not have play on awake activated. And this is just an explosion sound that I managed to get off SoundLink. So yeah, awesome. So now let me show you actually how to make this. So now the entire Udon graph is a little bit big, but let me, walk you through it in all the different parts. A lot of this is to do with syncing, which I haven't tested yet. So that'll be fun. Anyways, so let me just delete that and start over again. So we're just going to come into here. I'm going to create VRChat Udon graph program asset, and I'm going to call this timer script. That should work. Then I want to come over to our cube, and you want to go add component, create an Udon behavior component, and then we just want to drag and drop our script into it, and then we're going to click open Udon graph. Awesome. So now that we're in the Udon graph, I'm just going to go shift spacebar to full screen it. You can always double click on the tab too. And then in the variables tab, so first of all, I'm just going to create a Text Mesh Pro object. So we go Text Mesh Pro, and we need the UGUI one because we are dealing with a UI object. And I'm just going to call this target text. Yeah, maybe you could call it timer text or something, but we're just going to make it public, so we'll be able to see it inside the inspector. We compile, we can see that it shows up here. Awesome. So now we need to show the text of what it is. So the way we can do this is, I'm first just going to simplify this a bit and just use get time node all the way down here. And this is the time since the game began. And we're just going to first start displaying that, then we're going to show you how we can offset that, and then we're going to show you how you can do a countdown with that, and we're just going to expand the script from there. So the first of all we need is we need to get we need to put it into a text format. So currently this is in seconds, and we can put this, actually let's just show that first. So I'm going to grab my target text, I'm then going to use a Text Mesh Pro UGUI set text node, and we're going to plug that in there. And now we need to give it a string value. So I'm going to grab this float, and we're going to use a float to string node. And we plug that in here. Then we can use an update node. An event update node. It's all the way at the bottom. And then we can plug that in. And now this should be a good way to start our nice little script. So I'm sorry, if I just come back to the scene, I want to grab our object. We need to tell it the text object. So I'm just going to give them the text object. And then when we hit play, we can see that now we're in the world, it's counting up. And we can see it's got, a bunch of decimal places and all that good stuff. So how can we change that? Well, if we go back to the Udon behavior, go back to our timer text, we have this string object. So if we were to change this to string IF format or whatever, you can't actually put anything in the provider slot. That is a Udon Sharp exclusive feature because of just how Udon works. But in the format, if we were to put a D2 node, this will grab the relevant, this will grab two significant figures. So we hit compile and come back in and press play again. We get an error. Give me a sec. I skipped a step. Turns out D2 only works if it's an int and not for a float. Anyways, so what I've done here is we grab the time, we can run that to an int, and then we use a toString modifier to that. We should see that this counts only seconds. So if I hit compile and come back into our game and press play. And so now we can see it counting up by 1 second each time, and it's only showing 2 digits. This will be important going forward. So now what we need to do is we need to grab our time, and we need to separate it out into the seconds, the minutes, the hours, as well as the milliseconds. And now to do that, it gets a little complicated, and I'll be honest, I just asked ChatGPT for this. At least for the math part of it. So I'm going to be showing that here. So what we want to use is we want to use a float division node, and this will be for the hours. So for this we need to divide it by 3,600, and then we want to use our round to int. I used floor to int. I believe round to int's more correct, so we'll see if that's wrong or not. I'm not going to edit that out if it is so though. So we're just going to use our round to int node, and for this we only want to show a single one for the hours, so I'm going to use a D1. So that means we'll only ever show one up to 1. So this time will only be able to go up to 9 hours and 59 minutes and whatever. This will just make it a bit better. Then what we need to do is we need to use a float remainder node, and this is going to get the remainder of 360. So this is whatever remains after we do that division, and then we need to divide it by 60. And then once again, we're going to use our whole float to int and whatnot. But for this, we want 2 digits, so I'm going to use a D2. Wait. There we go. Then we need to use another remainder node, and this will be remainder 60, as we just want to get whatever remains after we do all the rest. And we can just grab our round to int and bring that over here. Once again, we still want 2 digits for this, so that is correct. And then last but not least, we want to grab the milliseconds, which for this we actually need to use a multiplier node. So I'm going to use a float multiplication node, and I'm going to multiply it by 1,000. I'm then going to use a remainder 1,000. And then we want to use a round to int, and for this one we want 3 digits, so I'm going to use a D3. So now this is all well and good, but we need to combine this all together. So now we could use a bunch of string addition nodes, but that will just get a bit complicated, or it just wouldn't look that clean. So instead I'm going to use a string format node, which to be honest is a more complicated node to understand, but it's actually not too bad. So what we want to use a string object array, and this will give us 3 inputs. Ideally we'd have 4, and if we're using Udon Sharp we could have 4, but this is a limitation of Udon Graph, so we'll just work with what we got. So in the format section, what we want to do is for each one of these arguments, we just do these curly brackets, and we can type in a number. Then, in between that will be whatever text it shows in between those values. So I can just do this. So we want it to display the hours. Then we want it to put a colon in the middle. Then we want to display the minutes. Then we put another colon. And then we want to display the seconds, which will be whatever argument 2 is. And then put a full stop at the end of it. We're going to have to add on the milliseconds after the fact, but that should be fine. Anyways, now we can just plug our different values into the different things. And so whatever comes out of this int will replace argument number 0, which will just replace that part of it. So that will get replaced by whatever this output is. Now technically, we could just drag and drop the int into there, but the problem is that we might have some extra bits remaining after the fact, and so we just don't want any of that. So we're just going to rely on this to make sure that we don't have that. I hope that makes sense. None of this was scripted. Anyways, we do need to add the milliseconds to the end of it, so I'm going to use a string addition node. I'm going to add that to the end of it. Now, I don't know why we're doing hours necessarily. That might actually just be kind of silly. but I'll show you how to get rid of the hours later, and then we can do all of it in the format node, and it will look just a bit cleaner. So anyways, we now want to grab this final output, and we want to put that into our TextMesh Pro GUI set text node. So now what this should do is it should grab our time, it should find what the hours are, what the minutes are, what the seconds are, and what the milliseconds are, and it should add that to the correct spot and generate our string to look correct. So we can just hit compile, and then come back into the scene and press play. And now if you've done all this correctly, we should be greeted with a nice little counting thing. However, we are having a bit of a snap point there and whatnot, and I believe the fix for that is if I was just to have the TextMesh Pro, if I was to disable wrapping, come back to the game, now we're correct. Okay, so that was just a little mishap on my end in terms of how I had this lined up. So let me just come here and disable wrapping. That's due to how I've made this, it's nothing to do with the script. The script's fine, this is just how I set it up. Anyways, coming into the Udon graph, we can see that this all works. However, what if we want to restart the time that we're counting up by? Well, in order to do that, we need to record what the time was when we clicked the button. So for that, I'm going to create another float, and I'm going to call this start time. We can hit the drop down button. We don't need to make it public or synced. We simply can just do this here. So now we want it to update whenever we click the button. So for this, I'm going to use a event interact node, and I'm going to set the time to be whatever time currently is. So when we click the button, this value will be whatever time is. Then we want to subtract this start time from our current time to get the difference in between the two. So for that, I'm going to use a float subtraction node. And then we're going to grab our current time and subtract. Yeah, there we go. Subtract start time, and then we can just plug these in. Boop, boop, and... Oh, no, that didn't mean to grab you. Go back to where you were. And boop. And now, we should grab our time, and it'll subtract whenever we started the timer, and then use that as the reference start time. So we can compile and come back into a scene and press play. And now, we've got our little button here, and now because our script's on the cube, which is interactable, we can see that when we click it, it restarts the timer, which is really, really cool. However, I want this to go the other way, so instead of us counting up, we're counting down from a set time. So in order to do that, we need another variable. So I'm just going to come into the Udon behavior, and I'm going to create another float, and I'm going to call this, what did I call it? I called it timer limit. I still don't think that's a very good name, but it'll work for this. I'm going to make it public, and by default, let's make it 5 seconds. So this is the amount of seconds that the timer will count down from. So for this, we want to grab our timer limit and then subtract whatever the difference is. So we're just going to use another subtraction node, and we're going to grab our timer limit and subtract that, and then apply that to these values. Boop, boop, and boop. Cool, I'll clean this up afterwards. So I can hit compile and come back into our scene, and now when we press play, we can see now that it counts down, and we'll notice that it goes into a whole bunch of awkward negatives if it goes below that value. But we can click it to restart it, which is really, really cool. Now, I'm noticing that this is counting up a little too high here, and I think that is the mistake that I've made. So if we just come back into our Udon graph, let's replace these round to ints to floor to int. So we want a mathf, not floor to half. We want a mathf floor to int. And so this node will, basically it's like round to int, however it will always go one step. However, it was always round downwards instead of rounding up. So this is the error that I was running into. And also why I needed to change the formatting on my TextMesh Pro. Because every now and then, it probably was doing like 1,000, when it should technically never be able to go to 1,000. That is my mistake. I'm sorry, I didn't actually test that. I kind of just like, this should be correct, and then it wasn't. So let me just put these back to here. So now we can see these are all mathf floor to int. And we should see that when we hit compile and come back into our scene and press play, we should see that now when we click the button, it goes to 5 seconds and not whatever it was doing before. And just like that, it's all correct. Now you notice we went to a bunch of negatives. That's because it's rounding downwards and all these go to negatives. But for our case, when it goes to 0, we just want to set it to display 0, essentially. So to do that, we can just stop playing. Let's come back into our Udon graph. And now we need to detect whether or not we are currently playing. So when we click the button, we want it to start playing, and when we disable the button, we want it to stop playing, essentially. So for this, I'm going to create another bool, and I'm going to call this is playing. And we don't need to make it public or anything, we just need to keep track of it. So I want to set this variable to be true when we click the button. So for that, I'm going to use a boolean, not Udon irrigation, constant node, and I'm going to plug that in. So now when we click the button, this bool will become true. Really cool. However, we need to check whether or not we're currently playing, and only if we're playing do we actually want to set what the text is currently. So I'm actually going to move this over here because we're going to need to move it later anyways. I'm going to use a branch node, which we can just hold down B and click if you don't have anything selected. And I'm going to put in my isPlaying bool. And just like that, we have it so when we click the button, it will check if we're playing, and if we are playing, it will change our text, and if it's not playing, it won't do anything. So this will stop our update loop playing, and this is really, really good. If you're not currently using it, you don't really want it counting, just in general. So this is a good optimization, despite the fact. We're setting the bool to be true here, so we'll only start when we start playing this. However, we need to detect whether or not we have reached the timer limit. And for that, we just need to check whether or not this number is, whether or not this float is below 0. So for that, we want another branch node, and this is why I moved it across. And what we're going to do. So if we want to grab a float, and what do we want? If it's less, no, okay. If it's greater, sorry, we want to less than, yeah, okay. So if this value is less than 0, we want it to do something else, but if it's more than 0, which is on the false, we want it to change the text. But if it's less than 0, we actually want to set this text to be just a blank value. So in the value section, I'm just going to put what it should show when it is 0. So we're going to put that there. And last but not least, we need to tell it that we're no longer playing because we've reached the limit. So I'm just going to put that here and make that false. And so like this, let me just move this here and let me explain this. So when you click the button, we'll set isPlaying to be true or false. Every single frame, it will check whether or not we're playing. And if we are playing, it will do our logic. And if our timer has reached less than 0, it will set our text to just be this default value and tell our script that we're no longer playing. However, if we're still, more than 0, we're still counting downwards, we want it to change what the text is. Awesome. So now if we were to hit play, awesome. So now if we were to hit compile and then hit play, we should start with it no longer counting. This is because we've set isPlaying to be false when the game begins. If we want to change that, we'd come in here and we'd go isPlaying and make it false. I can't show you, I'm currently in play mode. But anyways, we can come over here, and when we click the button, we can see it starts counting from 5, and then when it gets to 0, it just shows 0, and it stops counting. And so now we have a timer. However, we'd quite like something to happen when we reach 0, right? Like, we want a nice little explosion. And so for that, that's where the rest of it comes in. So now I've got two things here. I've got a particle system, and I have my audio. Once again, the audio is gained from Soundly, and the particle system is just something that I quickly whipped up. You can see the beginning of the game, you can see the beginning of the tutorial in order to figure out, what I did here, but I'll just show it again here just for the sake of it. Anyways, so for this, I'm just going to come into, I'm going to come into the Udon graph, and now we need to access these variables, or these components. And so we've got a particle system component and an audio source component, so I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to create an audio source variable and a particle system variable. And I'm just going to call this target audio and target particle sys. Awesome. And so now we just need these both to play when we stop playing. So I'm just going to grab both of them. I'm going to use a... Oh, hold up. I'm going to use an audio... Can I type? An audio source play node, which will tell our audio source to play. You could use a play once node as well if this is going to happen often enough, but this should be correct for most people. And then we want to use a particle system play node to tell our particle system to play. And so with this, when the value runs out, it will set is playing to be false. It will then play our audio and play our particle. So if I compile and come back into our scene, we do need to tell it. So I'm going to find my cube, and we've got that. We didn't make them public. So I'm going to come into here. I'm going to hit these drop down and make it public, and then hit compile so we can see them inside the scene value. And now we've got our two variables. So I'm going to give it our audio, and I'm going to give it our particle. For whatever reason, I've flipped these around. Great. Anyways, now if we hit play, we can see that now they're in the world. We can click the button. It starts counting down. And hopefully when we get to 5, it plays our audio and it plays our nice little particle. Awesome! So with that, we've basically made what we need to do. The last thing to do is the networking side of things. And that's the bit I A, haven't tested, and B, is a bit confusing. By the way, in the particle system, you can always click restart or pause and or stop and then play to see that. Anyways, we now need to network this because, well, VRChat's a multiplayer game. So how can we do the networking? Now, this was something that I considered for a bit, and I think I have a solution. So one thing you could do is technically we could just use a send custom networked event. And you know what? That will probably work for most people. However, if you've got a late joiner and it's a bit of a longer delay, it won't really sync. But honestly, yeah, that's probably the easiest method. Give me a little time to think. Okay, I've decided. So first what we're going to do is we're just going to show you the easy way of doing this with a networked event, and then we're going to try and make it so that if someone joins in late, I would also like them to, you know, be up to date as to roughly whereabouts it is. You're going to have a bit of lag in there anyways, but if I could keep it more or less correct, that would be great. So let me just show you this first. So currently we have it so when we interact it, we set a start time and then we start playing. Now this is all well and good, however only the local player will play the interactive bit. So instead we need to network this, and the easy way to do this is we can use a Udon behavior send custom networked event, and we can send this to everyone, and then now we need an event to play, and to do that we can create a custom event, or event custom as they like to call it, and I'm going to call this start timer. Start trimmer. Wow, okay, that was interesting. Anyway, start timer. We set, we press compile, reload, and then tell it to start timer. And so with that, now when we click the button, it will tell everyone to start this timer, which will start the explosion, or at least hopefully it will. So if we come back to this, we can go into VRChat and go builder, and we're going to build and test with 2 instances to test out the networking. Awesome. So now that we're in the world, we can see that we've got our 2 players, and one of them clicks the button. It starts with both players, and then after the same amount of time, it should explode. Awesome. Sorry, I've actually got this muted. Let me just unmute that real quick. Oh, no, I put them to 0. Who puts it to 0? What the... I was doing tests. Anyways, that should work totally fine. Cool, so that works. However, how can we make it instead that we make it so that it will update everyone? Say it's a longer timer. Like, say this is a timer that's like 5 minutes, and someone like it receives it late and whatnot, and you want it to update. Or what if someone joins within those 5 minutes and you want them to also see that value? That's where this kind of networking kind of falls apart, because there is a chance that someone won't actually receive a networked event if they're like AFK or something, and we want them to update it. We want to update everyone that, hey, look, the count is going down, and all that good stuff. And also, if someone joins in late, you know, they don't get to see everything, or that kind of carry on. So how can we make it so that everyone plays this? Well, in order to do that, I've had a bit of thinking, and I think I know how we do this. So currently we've got set is playing. So what we want to do is we want to create a synced version of that, so we can tell everyone, hey, look, we're currently playing. So I'm going to go bool, and I'm going to call this synced is playing. Synced is playing, and we're going to hit the drop down and make it a synced value so that everyone will see it. And we're just going to set this to be whatever set is playing is. Obviously, we could just grab it from there too, but like this will allow us to copy and paste it later on. Also, we're going to get rid of this next event because I don't like that. And generally, you want to avoid networked events unless it's something simple like a fireworks, or in this case, it was a small little, little button that you could press that was going to go off in like 5 seconds, so it didn't really matter if someone missed it or not. Anyways, so currently we've got set is playing, and when other people see the is playing changing, we want them to also set is playing to be that. So I'm going to do on deserialization, which gets played whenever someone else sees a networked event change. We're going to check if is playing equals set is playing. When we do this with a... No, actually, I'm going to change this up a little here. If is playing is currently not active, then we want to set it to be is playing. So if it's currently not active, we want it to be is playing. I'm going to use a block node here so we can do more stuff later. Okay, so a little intermission there. So we've got the is playing working, and now the next thing we need to do is we need to grab our current time and we need to sync that so that other players can go, okay, I'm this far behind. Let me grab my time, let me subtract that offset time, and let me set that as the new start time so that they're all synced up with the main player. This won't include how long it took for you to get that information. However, in most cases, that should be fine. Especially because as soon as it hits 0, it's going to play the logic anyways. And you're going to set is playing to be false. So what we're going to do here is we need to create another variable. So I'm going to do float, and I'm going to call this synced time remaining? Yeah, time remaining. And we're going to hit this drop down, make it synced so everyone will see it. And so both of these are synced. Cool. Just double checking my own logic. So what we're going to do here is we're going to check synced is playing. No, not synced is playing. We're going to check sync time remaining, and we want to set this to equal 5 when we start the counter, or whatever our current thing is. So in order to do this, I'm going to grab, where is it? Timer limit. That's the value I wanted. And we're going to set sync time remaining to equal whatever the timer limit is when we click the button. So this is basically saying, hey, look, the time is complete. Then what we're going to do is we're going to check how long it's been since we last updated that value, and then we'll update it. And then whenever that updates, on deserialization, we're going to recorrect when our start time is. So for that, I'm going to come into here. I got sync time remaining, and we want to, if sync time remaining, and the subtraction, and we want to go float greater than, hold up. We're gonna grab that. We're gonna grab the time remaining, subtract it from this. And then if that is greater than, let's say, 0.2 seconds. And let's make it not jump around so much. Let's go 0.5 seconds. If it's been more than that, we then want to update sync time remaining to be whatever this value is, and then sync it. Sorry, just figuring this out myself while I'm recording. Great time to be doing it. So for this, I now want to go, not synced as playing, sync time remaining, hold down control to get a new variable. If it's greater than that, we want it to equal this value. Awesome. Now we are miles away, so let me just do a block node here. So first you do that, and second of all you do this. No, not that. I went too far. Go to the branch node. Okay, let me figure out how I'm going to clean this up. So that goes there. This can go here. So generally for cleaning up code, just while I'm doing this, you want to avoid making it so that the lines intercept as much as possible. It's impossible to get rid of it all, but if as much like of the nodes you want to just not be going on. I also don't like backtracking. I don't like stacking, but that's a bit of a personal preference for mine. I also like it so that whenever you do a branch node, for it to go up if it's true and down if it's false. But once again, it's a bit of a preference thing. Sometimes it leads to your codes kind of expanding outwards, which also isn't great. So it's 100% a preference thing. So I think this is probably as good as it's going to get. This is, when you've got so many values coming out from the 1 point, Udon graph really struggles. Because that kind of works, but I think this actually looks cleaner, even though, like, maybe we could do some of this stacking here. I don't like doing this, but I think in this case it will look a little bit cleaner. Yeah, and then what if I was to move this? Nah, because then it's intercepting all that stuff. Or what if I grab these free bits and move it across? You know what? I think that looks a bit cleaner. I don't know why I'm worrying about this so much in the code. I'm so sorry. Skip to this amount of time in order to pass or something. Maybe I need to add that in. Who knows? I'm just rambling. Yeah, okay, that should be good. So now what we're going to do is we need to make it so that whenever the information of our sync time remaining has changed, then we need to, on deserialization, check that. So why is that going there? You go up. You can go wherever. I don't really care too much. That should be fine. Let's grab a block node down a bit. And so we should grab sync time remaining. Let's check. Okay, so if isPlane is true, once again doing it is a check here. So if sync time equals true, like isPlane equals true, we've got sync time remaining here, and we need to grab our current time. And we need to figure out when did the start time happen. Because the problem is get time is different between different players because it depends on when did you join the world. So we can grab what the current, we know start time was get time right when the game began. And we also know that sync time remaining equal timer limit when they click the button. So what we can do is we can grab we've got start time and we can subtract sync time remaining to that. And so now we've got how long ago did this happen, and then we can subtract our time. Or we can grab our current time, subtract it from the difference, so how long it's been, and from that we can find out what the start time should be, if my logic's correct here. So I'm going to set start time to equal that. And this only should happen if we're currently playing, otherwise we shouldn't do it. So I think with that, I think we're good. I think that's all we need. You know, fingers crossed. Last but not least, I do want to use manual syncing because no one should use continuous syncing. If you can avoid it, you should just don't use continuous syncing. And for this, we need to say when do we want it to update. So we want it to update the synced values when the game begins. Oh, we haven't done anything yet. That needs to change. We also, whenever we update the sync time, we're going to do this here. This looks messy, but I am going to fix it, actually. There we go. You can go there. And you can go there. How pretty. And then last but not least, we do need to update it so say that, hey, look, we're no longer playing whenever we stop playing, essentially. So I'm going to grab our synced as plane. In fact, I'm actually going to grab all of this. Boom. And then I'm going to grab this to here. And we don't need that anymore. And let's not bother with that. Okay. Look at that. So now what we have is when the game begins, it will oh, this is so complicated. It will start us playing and set the start time to be whatever. It will also set the synced is playing to equal true. This only works if we're the current owner of the object. We need to change it to we're the owner of the object. Networking, set owner. And for this, we need a player API local player. Not get is local. Player API. Oh, sorry. A networking local player node. And we set ourselves as the owner of the object. You need to be the owner of the object in order to change these values. Boom. Boom. Up here. Last but not least, we also have got this over here. We were setting it, but the thing is, only the local player is able to even change this value, so we don't need to check if we're the owner of the object. That would be better if we had like a bool to say, are we the current owner? But then we'd have to keep, I'd be making this script a little bit longer, and that'll be confusing a bunch of you. So I'm going to avoid that for now. Actually, no, I'm just going to avoid it altogether. Okay, so we've got all this, and so when we click the button, it will set start time, it will set as plain to equal true, then we will become the owner of the object so that we can change the synced variables, and then we're going to set is plain to equal true, we're going to set the time remaining to be whatever the timer limit is, and then we're going to tell everyone, hey, these values have updated, so we're going to send that off to the network. Then, every single frame, it's going to check, are we playing? If we are playing, it's going to get our time and subtract it from start time in order to know how long it's been since we last clicked the button. Then, if that is, we're going to grab the time limit and subtract how long it's been since we last pressed the button to find out how much time we have left on the timer. Then we're going to check whether or not the sync time remained and the timer, if that's greater than, half a second, then we need to tell everyone, hey, look, this is what the current value of that is. Just so that everyone can sync up, they'll get these values and go, oh, shoot, we're this far into the timer, and then we'll update the timer, which would be great. And if it is more than that, we're going to update sync time remaining and request serialization. If it hasn't, or regardless of that, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to check, hey, is this timer less than 0? Because if it is less than 0, then we need to just, we've blown up. This is the end of the timer. And then it will set our target text to equal a default value, set as plain to be false, play our particle and audio, as well as we'll set our synced as plain to equal false. So everyone knows that, hey, look, we're no longer playing. And it's false because is plain is set to false back there. Also, what we're going to do, though, is if it's, if we're not less than 0, we're just going to update the timer to be these new values, which is all well and good. Now, on-serialization is going to play whenever request serialization has been called. So whenever the owner of the object fires request serialization saying, hey, look, the values have updated, it's going to play the on-deserialization node for everyone but the owner of the object. Then we're going to check if isPlain equals false currently, set isPlain to be true. Essentially. Well, only if synced isPlain. If isPlain equals false and synced isPlain equals false, it's going to set it to false again. Doesn't really matter. We ain't. It's a little bit of logic, but it'll be fine. Last but not least, if isPlain equals true, after we've potentially set it to true up here, we're going to set the start time to be whatever our start time is. Is that correct? Oh my gosh, this is another issue, isn't it? There should be timer limit. I don't know what I was thinking about. So the timer limit, which is the maximum amount set up here, minus sync time remaining. And if we subtract those two, we'll get how long has it been since the timer was started, because would start at 5 and then it goes down from then. Anyway, so now that we've got the difference, we can get our time and subtract that from that, and we can figure out what time should have been when this started. And then we can set start time to equal that. Oh boy, I can't believe I messed that up. But now that we've gone through it, found all the errors, because I did make a couple of typos there, which I'm so sorry for, especially because you guys are probably following along. Now we can come into our into the scene and whatnot. We can go to VRChat. What am I talking about? Let me come back to the Udon graph, press compile, and then we go to VRChat SDK, and we can build and test this with multiple players to test out the networking. And now that we're in the world, we can see that when one player clicks the button, it starts the same for both players. And after a little bit, it causes an error. Okay, so why is it causing an error here? Well, that's because set start time is constantly updating properly. Let me just have a quick look. Okay, I immediately found what the problem was. In our scene, we meant to go to the timer object and set it to be manual sync. That was error number 1. Error number 2 is that basically set start time was always going to be higher, and so if isPlane equals true, and this is constantly getting called, it will update that. So look, this was me being lazy. I come into here, I set start time, not set start time, sync time remaining. Let me grab that value. Sync time remaining should equal 0. So come into here, use a float constant node, and make that equal 0. And now if I hit compile, come back to Udon chat, and then we go build and test to test this out for a second time. And now they're in the world, we can see that when one player clicks the button, it should be the same for both players. And boom. Now you notice there was a bit of a delay, and that's just because it took a little bit of time for one player to get to the other player. I notoriously have a pretty high ping, and if we were to look at the network status, oh, that's not quite the full thing. We can see that we've got like 0.5-ish seconds. There's a bit of hitching going on, because of course there is, it's VRChat's networking. But that should be more or less what we need to, what it is. And also, someone joins late, this should all work correctly, as we saw earlier when it failed and the values kept updating to be what they weren't, essentially. So anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. Sorry I couldn't really show you this, like, working. Like, I can't show you the delay optimization there. And so sorry there was a bunch of mistakes when networking this. I didn't really look into that. But I hope you found this video helpful. Feel free to leave a like if you liked it, leave a comment down below with any questions, and feel free to check out some of the other videos that I have on this channel, or more importantly on the main channel, because this channel doesn't have that many. Please do subscribe. I'd quite like to, you know, have this one be anywhere near or comparable to the original one. But with all that said, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again next time. Bye!